Welcome to this recorded webinar. Our title is How Should I Plan for the DLM Science Alternate Assessments? This webinar is being added to the State Agora site that has resources to help educators in implementing the DLM alternate assessments. This webinar will be of particular interest to teachers serving students in grades 5, 8, and 11, the grades where alternate assessments are being given. We'll talk about the testing requirements that will be in the spring, and also about the science essential elements and some of the instructional components that you'll be addressing to prepare for those assessments. The essential elements for science align to Iowa Core, and they are specific statements of knowledge and skills that are linked to grade level expectations. And these essential elements represent the most frequently assessed alternate standards in DLM science states across the consortium that were identified in the 2012 Framework for Science Education. It should be noted that the current set of essential elements for science addresses a small number of science standards, and it does represent a breadth but not depth of coverage across the entire standards framework. Over time, the DLM Science Consortium does intend to develop a learning map based on research on how students learn science content and engage in scientific learning. And so we will see revisions once a science learning map is completed. And it's anticipated that sometime between spring of 2018 and spring of 2019, we may see a revision to the essential elements for science. But we do want to address those that are in place at this time and the ways that they align to our alternate assessment requirements. If you're accessing this presentation from the State Agora site, there will be a link to the Iowa Core Essential Elements for Science in there. And if you're a teacher, particularly if you're having students grades 5, 8, and 11 where you'll be doing assessments in the spring, you're going to want to be sure to access that document so that you can align lessons and instruction with some of the content. One thing important to note is that for the science assessments, there are 3 linkage levels, unlike the 5 linkage levels that we have available for ELA and math. So those linkage levels are not as fine-grained, but there is a target, a precursor, and an initial level that are available for the spring testing in science. Now this slide shows kind of a comparison. You can see up here the linkage levels that most of you are familiar with for ELA and math. We have initial, distal precursor, proximal precursor, the target, which is the grade level essential element, and even a successor that goes a step beyond that. And down here for science, we have kind of a broader conception. We have the initial that is down here, similar to initial and distal precursor. We have the precursor level, and we have the target. And of course, these linkage levels are less complex. At this time, there is not the equivalent of a successor. There are just 3 linkage levels for science. And when it comes time to give the science assessments, as is the case with ELA and math, your first contact survey that describes your student will be the piece of information that will direct the system as to whether to start the student at an initial, precursor, or target level for science. Now, if you go into the essential elements for science, you'll have a little booklet that you can access, and it will show a format similar to what you're seeing here on the screen. So this, for example, is showing a 5th grade essential element. And if you look up here, let's just walk through the format of what you'll see. In the light blue shaded area, you'll see that the standards are organized into a domain, a core idea, and a topic. And then you can see down here the state standard for general education and the conception of how this one is falling into earth and space science. So the DLM consortium selected some of these commonly used standards across the states and selected a number of them to be in this collection of essential elements. So you see that up here in the light blue. As you move down into the white section, you can see that we have the essential element broken down into a target level, a precursor level, and an initial level. And you can see how the target level, as we move to the precursor initial level, the material that would be assessed becomes less complex. And again, your first contact survey is going to drive which of these levels your student may have their assessment given when spring comes by. I think something that's also helpful in the essential elements document, you can see down here in the yellow, there is a section that is dedicated to looking at connections. So connections to science practices, um, connections to cross-cutting concepts, and then even connections to some specific essential elements that are English language arts and math. So that as you're planning your instruction for your students across the year, you will find opportunities where you may be able to integrate science instruction with math or ELA. So you can see here on this particular one, there's a connection to ELA. It's mentioned the one essential element here is select or create audio recordings and visual tactile displays to enhance the presentation. So happens to be an ELA essential element that has to do with communication, presenting information. And then you can look down here also several math connections that you might use. So be thinking about this as you're thinking about opportunities for your students to integrate science instruction. You might want to reference this document to get a sense of how you might integrate that in with math and ELA lessons. This next slide shows these large domains. Now, if we look across the top here, our three big domains in science are physical science, life science, and earth-space science. This screenshot is showing the number of essential elements that were created from this study of state standards. So, for example, elementary, we have 4 essential elements developed for physical science, 2 for life science, and 3 for earth space science. And then we can look down and see the same for middle school and high school level. And we know that in Iowa, our assessed grades that align with those are grades 5, 8, and 11. So when you look at these numbers and go through the document and the science essential elements, you will see a presentation like this for each one of those. And again, thinking about that format that we just looked at, I want to remind you that that middle section of each page that addresses an essential element, which is the white color, shows the 3 differentiated levels. So again, we're just looking at an example here. One to kind of give you a sense of how these levels will be differentiated. Here's a middle school level. So if we look at the essential element referenced there, the target, investigate and predict the change in motion of objects based on forces acting on those objects. We shift to the precursor level, investigate and identify ways to change the motion of an object. For example, change an inclined slope to make an object go slower, faster, farther. And then the initial level. We look here, identify ways to change the movement of an object, faster, slower, and stop. So again, there's this idea that we have our target, an essential element, which would already be viewed as a modified standard, but as we go down to our precursor and initial levels, those are less complex ways of looking at the same standard. Here are some important reminders regarding science assessment that you're going to want to remember. The first reminder is only students in grades 5, 8, and 11 are assessed in science. That's currently the assessment plan for Iowa. So only students who are currently in 5th, 8th, and 11th will be assessed. Also a reminder that DLM Science is a year-end assessment, and it will be administered during the spring testing window. Unlike ELA and math that have these instructionally embedded components that are being given in a fall and winter window, that is not occurring for science. Science is a year-end testing only, and it is in the spring window that will happen. Also, unlike the fall and winter windows for ELA and math, where teachers are selecting essential elements from the blueprint and then delivering the assessments, there's not a selection process for science. In the spring, the DLM system will automatically deliver 9 science test lists for each participating student. So if you have students in grades 5, 8, and 11 that are appropriately in the portal system in those grade levels, the system is going to deliver those assessments and have them ready for them. And of course, most of you will remember that there's a similar concept for ELA and math in the spring, which is different. The system will deliver the testlets versus selecting them as we do in the fall and the winter. Now, while for science you will not be selecting essential elements, you will want to be aware of the content that is going to be tested in the spring. And there is an Iowa science blueprint, and that articulates which essential elements will be assessed at each of the grade levels, 5, 8, and 11. And what you're seeing on screen here is just kind of that big picture again. We see the domains of physical life and earth space science. That's broken down into core ideas and then broken down further into topics. But let's pull up the Iowa Science Blueprint and look at that document specifically. If you are accessing this information through the state Agora, the blueprint is linked there, and it is always available on the Iowa Department of Education website as well. So here's an image of the blueprint itself, and as we scroll down you can see again this shot that we just showed in the PowerPoint, the domain, core ideas, and topics. So as we scroll down further, what you can also see is this screen, and this is showing by science topic and by grade level the number of essential elements that are assessed at each grade level. And as you look at this, if you look at our totals over here, if you go by grade and add the total of essential elements assessed here, you'll see that things will total up to 9 at each grade level. So 9 essential elements will be delivered as testlets, and so that is consistent. Each grade level students will receive 9 science testlet, and this blueprint shows you what will be assessed. So if we just, as an example, if we just pick the first one we come across here, 5th grade, under the physical science topics, we see there's actually 2 assessed, PS1A. If we scroll up, notice the topic there, the core idea is matter and its interactions, but the topic is structure and property of matter. So again, this blueprint will give you a clear picture of which essential elements are going to be assessed. And then if you jump back into the essential elements themselves, you'll get a clearer picture of what instruction looks like for that essential element. And again, you'll remember in the essential elements document, this is a format that you can go back and look into, so you can get a little bit more information on the standard, the essential element, and you can look at the breakdown of the essential element, target, precursor, and initial level, and depending on the level that your student is working on, that will give you better guidance on what instruction might look like as you plan your lessons in science. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about what the science assessments, the testlets, will actually look like. Not too much different from ELA and math. There are different delivery methods, and so let's talk about that. Some assessments will be teacher-administered testlets. Those will be those that are for your students that are working at that initial linkage level, so that the content is reduced in complexity quite a bit. In these cases, the teacher is responsible for doing an engagement activity when you log into Kite to deliver the assessment. There will be a script that will explain to you the engagement activity, what you'll do to interact with the student. That will be delivered through Kite, and then the teacher will record student responses in Kite as well. Also, though, for students that are working at the target and precursor levels, those will be computer administered. So those would be cases where students would have a test delivered directly to the computer through Kite, and these would be our students who would be able to independently navigate the testlets, having accessibility supports as they might need them. As far as the structure and format of the science testlets, they will vary. You can see here on screen here that as is the case with ELA and math, there are engagement activities to engage the student in in preparation for the science assessment. And you can see here there are a couple different types of structures that would appear in different testlets. There's going to be structure A here, an engagement activity that might be presented twice. And in this format, we would see questions embedded within and/or at the end of the activity. There's also the structure B, which would be a short engagement activity or context, would be presented once, and then in some cases, in this format, the questions would occur at the end of the activity. Some of you may experience some of these. The science test includes one new type of testlet that includes a video as part of the engagement activity. It mentions here that this testlet type is included at the middle school grade band at the precursor um, linkage level. So in this case, and this would be delivered through Kite, but students would view a short, and they mentioned that's less than 30-second video, and then there would be items after that video that include some still frame photos from the video. So a couple different types of formats that you will see for science. So what do the science testlets look like? What's the experience going to be like for the teacher and the students? You can see on screen here I have a link to there's an educator resource page that has some very specific science resources where you can see some released testlets and also tip pages, and we'll jump back at this. I've included the link here for some folks that may be using this PowerPoint in a face-to-face session. But let's jump to the next screen here. There are going to be tip pages as there are for ELA and math. And of course, this is the idea that prior to administering a testlet, there's a tip page, and you can see here's a sample. This is a released one that is available out on the DLM site. But this gives you an idea of what it might look like. And I pasted kind of parts of it on here just to give you kind of an image of what that would be like. So imagine if you access this tip page prior to testing a student. You can see this happens to be a teacher administered kind of a format. It tells us what materials would be needed, and it says, you know, for example, pictures you might need when appropriate or possible. It gives substitution suggestions for materials. It will inform you if there are accessibility supports not allowed, and just some general comments of what you might need. And so, for example, you may, on a tip page, have some images that need to be printed, and you may need to have those available for when you're giving the testlet. You can see here are some pictures that involve boiling and melting points. And for if you receive this, you know, the expectation would be that you have to print and sometimes cut out these pictures to use with your students. And then this is just an image to give you kind of a picture of what the testing experience may look like. I've just shown you some snippets here on the screen. So again, kind of going along with that sample tip page that I showed you there, if a teacher were going on to give the testlet to the student, they would have, in a teacher-directed one, they would have a script, such as what you see here, you know, what the educator should show the student, what they should say. It'll give you your script for the engagement activities and so forth. And then you would have something that would look like this, where you're going to be recording the student response. You know, and students may give a correct response. You may get a mixed response. You can see an example here. It might be the student indicated both pictures. You know, in some cases, a student is not attentive. They might attend to other stimuli, or no response. So again, this is giving you a picture of what it might look like for a science assessment for a student, potentially at that initial linkage level. Now, as you prepare in the spring to give the assessments for science, it is very important to access a tip page for each assessment that's going to be delivered to each of your students. The instructions on how to access those tip pages are in the Educator Portal Guide. There's a link in here for those accessing this PowerPoint from the Agora site, and we'll have a variety of links in those materials as well. But let's take a look at the process for accessing a tip page for science. Now what you're seeing here is just some snapshots coming right from the Educator Portal Guide. Notice how where you get your tip pages depends on the season. For those of you that have been accessing them in the fall and winter, you know that as you go into the instructional tools interface and you're selecting your essential elements, when you go into that confirmation screen, um, there's an instructional plan ultimately available, and when you confirm, you can access your tip page, which is a PDF document you can save or view or print. However, in the spring testing, there's a different process to get those, because remember, for science and also in the spring for ELA and math, the DLM system is assigning testlets versus you making your own selections. So you need to know where to get these tip pages. So here's the next screen that kind of walks you through that. And again, this is coming right from the Educator Portal Manual. When you go into your DLM portal account, we would be talking about going under the Management tab, the Manage Test tab, and it gives you kind of instructions on where to go from there. You're going to make all the appropriate selections. You're going to select dynamic learning maps, of course. The testing programs I've highlighted here is summative. You're going to, of course, choose your school, your subject grade, all of those kinds of things to get down to your list of information. And then you would click search, and you're going to get a list of test sessions displayed then that would look something like this. So if you look at the top of the screen that you have in front of you right now, you would click the test session that you would want to get a tip page from. So in other words, the system is assigning science testlets and also the ELA and math in the spring, and in the portal it's going to be archiving these tip pages. So you'll see a list of the tests that are assigned for each student. You're able to click on that and it will take you to that individual page, and you can see there will be a little PDF document that again you can choose to print or save or view. And again, just want to emphasize for science, because of this video, but also for all subject areas, really is important for you to have those tip pages ahead of time so that you'll be able to have the information to prepare, the right materials and things like that. And for science especially, there often are some materials to print out, some pictures or things like that. And notice here the hint in the middle here. You will see, as you'll see your list here of assigned testlets, and this will be shorter or lengthier depending on how many students that you have involved. And they mention here that the test session names are long, but you can see the format there. It would kind of be a list of student last name, first name, and test collection name. So you'd be able to navigate to the right one that you would want for your student. As we conclude, I will show you a link to the Science Resources page on the DLM site, and included in that, along with the links that we will put in the state Agora site, there is a Science Administrator Supplement, and that includes, as some of you have been familiar with, these sample passwords, where you can use these sample passwords to log into Kite, and it will give you potential practice activities that you can use as needed with your students, and it would also give you a better sense of what the tests look like. So I'm going to take one of these practice name and passwords, and I'm going to log into Kite, and we're going to take a quick look. So I've logged into my Kite client, and then I'm going to enter one of the demo logins. And then that will let me log in and navigate into some practice activities, and you can see these are loaded in under this particular sample login. And so you can see there are several practice activities. There's one labeled student practice activity, one labeled science teacher practice activity, and several sample testlets that you could work through to get more familiar with these as well. So I'd encourage you to take a peek at some of these and navigate through a few to give yourself a sense of what the science assessments will look like. I could log into one quickly here, just for example, Science High School. And notice the I, this would be at the initial level. We could log in there and begin. We get some educator directions. Again, it's setting the stage for this engagement activity, and you can see there's some materials and objects that you would need in this sample that's being shown here. And again, I would emphasize that's why it's so important that you access the tip pages before planning your assessments so that you'll have the materials you'll need. Again, this would be an initial level kind of an activity where it's a teacher-led. You would get a script, something like this, that would kind of tell you how to engage the student in an activity. It would give you, in many cases, a specific script. You're going to record student responses. So it gives you just a kind of a picture of what these will look like. And again, a reminder that the science tip pages fairly often do include pictures, images that you will want to have printed off as well, and it will also tell you if you need actual objects. I want to now go to the Science Resources page and show you some of the information that's available there. So here we are on the DLM page under the Science Resources, and again this link will be made available in the Agora site as well as embedded in the PowerPoint that some of you may be using for a face-to-face session. And notice here that the science resources are linked to a certain group of states in the DLM consortium, but you can see all the useful things that are here. Blueprint documents, the essential elements for science. Notice that or I would say remember that the Iowa versions of these are also on the Iowa Department of Education website. There's a guide to practice activities that includes the sample logins. I just took you to kind of a sample login to show you what the science test would look like, so you can, that will help you to access the practice tests and release testlets if you'd like to look at those. Just lots of information about science, some of which we've touched on. And notice down here actual release testlets that you can look at in a document format, just to become more familiar with them. The sample tips, just to look at. I gave you a few screenshots of those earlier in this presentation. And then lastly, notice there's also some science instructional activities over here. So as you're working through ways that you can provide instruction in science for your students, there are some resources here as well that are intended to support teachers who are beginning to use the science essential elements in their instruction. And they are grouped by elementary, middle, and high school. So you can see those codes that reference elementary, middle school, high school. So you can take a look at those as well. I can click on one just to show you Weather Watchers. It would give you some ideas for science instructional activities that you may want to use with your students. I want to thank you for attending this recorded webinar. This was just an opportunity to help make you more familiar with the science essential elements and the test lists that will be used in the spring session. Thank you.